This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem. I want to speak out an inyan on Sefiras HaOmer. Relevant to understanding, we know the Torah says, Usfartem lochem mimachras hashabas miyoim haviachem esomer hatznufa. You begin counting on the day after Pesach. Sheva Shabbosos, 7 weeks. T'mi Moisiena. And mimachras hashabas hashviyas tisbru chamishim yoim. So first it says that Usfartem lachem Sheva Shabbosos. First it says Usfartem lachem, you should count 7 weeks. And then it says Tisbru chamishim yom, you should count 50 days. So the Torah first talks about counting weeks, and then it talks about counting days. So the Gemara brings various opinions. The opinion of Abaye is mitzvah lemimni shvui, mitzvah lemimni yomi. There's a mitzvah to count weeks, and there's a mitzvah to count days. The opinion of Rabbeinu Yerucham is that these are two separate mitzvahs. Ad kedei kach, that your Rabbeinu Yerucham asks, then why don't we make two different brachas? Why don't we make a bracha, Asher Kedesham Tzois V'Tzivanu Lemispar Shavui, and count the weeks, and then Lemispar Yomi, and count the days. Just like we do on Tefillin Shel Yad and Tefillin Shel Rosh. It's a good question. If you hold there are two different mitzvahs, so why don't we make two different brachas? Says Rabbeinu Yerucham, because nowadays they are in two different mitzvahs. Why? Because the mitzvah to count weeks, listen carefully, Usfartem lachem mimachras hashabos miyoim haviachem es HaOmer Sheva Shabbosos. The mitzvah to count weeks is linked to the carbon omer. And therefore we don't bring the carbon omer anymore. And since we don't bring the carbon omer anymore, therefore the mitzvah to count weeks is only midrabanan. Masha'inkein, the mitzvah to count days is an independent mitzvah, just as Tisbru Chamishim Yom. So the mitzvah to count weeks, once upon a time was Doiraisa, nowadays is Durabanan, Zeichel Mikdash. But the mitzvah to count days is Midoiraisa. Therefore we only make a bracha on the Doiraisa, and we throw in the Durabanan. Why don't we make a separate bracha on the Durabanan? Because it's a Zeichel HaMikdash. We don't make a bracha on a Zeichel HaMikdash. You make a bracha on Kairech. You made a bracha on Kairech. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu mitzvos v'tzivanu le'echel Kairech. Kairech on Nadar. It's a mitzvah to make a bracha on Kairech. Of course not. You don't make a bracha on a Zeichel HaMikdash. You make a bracha on Chibur Arava. You don't make a bracha on Chibur Arava.
Sometimes in the Beis they made two brachas.
But back in the day, according to Rabbeinu Yerucham, l'chayra, they made two brachas. Yeah. Okay, that's the shita Rabbeinu Yerucham. Now we don't necessarily hold this way, as we're going to see, but Rabbeinu Yerucham shita makes some nafkaminas lahalacha. Minag Sfarad. Any Sfaradim here today? No Sfaradim. What? Make believe you're a Sfaradi. Most Ashkenazim probably were originally Sfaradim, but from Spain. But anyway, Minhag Sfarad, as they say like this. Today's 10, right? Hayoim Asara Yamim LaOmer Shehem Shavua Echad Ushloisha Yamim. Sfaradim say that. You knew that, David? That Sfaradim put LaOmer in the middle. We say Hayoim Asara Yamim Shem Shavua Echad Ushloisha Yamim LaOmer. Sfaradim say Hayoim Asara Yamim LaOmer Shem Shvua Echad Ushloisha Yamim. So comes Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank in the Mikroi Kodesh, and he says there's a very simple reason for the minhag of Sfarad, namely in deference to the opinion of Rabbeinu Yerucham, that Bizman Hazed days are Do'iraisa and weeks are D'Rabbanan. So according to what we do, we have a problem. The problem is Hayoim Asara Yamim Shehem Shavua Echad Ushloisha Yamim LaOmer. If you need to say LaOmer, we're being mafsik between the Yamim, which is Midairaisa, and the word LaOmer. With what? Shehem Shavua Echad Ushloisha Yamim. That's not really Iker, that's only Zeichel HaMikdash. So you're being mafsik between the Iker Mania of Yamim and the word LaOmer by counting the Shavuos. That's not proper. Therefore, Minhag Sfarad, in deference to Rabbeinu Yerucham, they say, Hayoim Asara Yamim LaOmer. Finished, you're done with Sefiras HaOmer. Then they add Zeichel HaMikdash, Shehem Shvua Echad U'Shloisha Yamim. That's where the minhag Sfarad comes from, not to be mafsik between the ikar counting and the word la'omer. That's the shita of the Sfardim. So what do we Ashkenazim do? So he brings on the bottom, on the bottom of the Mekroi Kodesh, there are footnotes by the son-in-law of Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank. Anybody know who the son-in-law of Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank was? His name was Hagoin Reb Yosef Kohen. Reb Yosef Kohen was a great Goin. He sat on a bezin with Reb Yashiv, and he was the one who sort of redacted Mekroi Kodesh, and he wrote footnotes on the bottom. When I was learning in Eretz Yisrael 24 years ago, I had the zechus to hear a shir from him. He is the father of the Karn Rosh Yeshiva of Chevron, Reb David Kohen. Reb David Kohen is the grandson of Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank. Anyway, he brings over here now the question he asks, but now if you say la'omer in the middle like Sfardim do, then you're missing the word. See, what Ashkenazim have an advantage, because our la'omer is going on both days and weeks, right? But according to the Sfardim, the word la'omer is only going on days, it's not going on weeks. He says, the Rashba says the word la'omer in between could go on what is said before and what is said after. So it's going on both. Furthermore, the Rashba says the whole la'omer is not ma'akev at all. It's only ra'oi to say the word la'omer. And therefore for Ashkenazim, where la'omer is not so critical, we're not worried about the hefsek, okay? This is a shita of Tzvi Pesach Frank. You get Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank shita. Weeks is connected to the carbon oimer. Therefore, Bisman Hazeh it's d'Rabbanan. Days is not connected to the carbon oimer. Therefore, it's midaraisa. Okay. So the question is, first question, Rabbi say, why would weeks be connected to the carbon oimer and days not? So you say, well, that's what the Torah says. Why would the Torah link the weeks to the carbon oimer and days not linked to the carbon oimer? So there's an amazing Ar Sameach. You ready for this? The Ar Sameach in Hilchos Tamidim Umusafin, Halacha Chaf Beis. Let's see, I guess this is Perek Zayin, Halacha Chaf Beis. The Ar Sameach asks, I'm sorry, my copying machine wasn't working this today. He quotes the Rabbeinu Yerucham. He says, Minyan Shvua is min ha-Torah bizman shebeis hamikdash kayam, because it says, Me'hochel chermesh bakama tochel lispar shiva shavuais, but the Yomim is min ha-Torah, even bizman hazeh. So the question is, the Yomim stands on its own. The Shavuos is linked to the Omer. As to Ar Sameach, the Imtishal, Madua, why? Why? Why would weeks be linked to Karbanos and days not be linked to Karbanos? So it says Ar Sameach, Gezeras Melachi. It's a decree of the king. Uvisoid Elokai miyavai. Who could enter the secrets of God? Says Ar Sameach, I'm going to reveal the secret to you, because the Gemara reveals the secret in the first parak of Rosh Hashanah. You ready for this? Does anybody know? If somebody, on every Yom Tov you have to bring a carbon chagiga. If you don't bring it on the first day of Yom Tov, you can bring it on the second, the third. What about Shavuos? How long do you have to make up the carbon chagiga for Shavuos? Let's say you don't bring the carbon chagiga on Shavuos. How long do you have? 7 days, very good. Yalfinan tashlumin lekarbanos re'ia v'chagiga ba'atzeres kol shiva. Ma chodesh lemenuyav af atzeres lemenuyav. You have a week. The Gemara asked, maybe you only have 1 day. Rava said, we only count days. Don't we count weeks? It says Chag Shavuos, a holiday of weeks. Which means like this. That means the Yom Tif of Shavuos has 2 dimensions to it. It has a dimension of Yom Tif, and it has a dimension of Karbanos. Legabe Yom Tif, Shavuos is 1 day. Legabe Karbanos, Shavuos is 7 days. So, where do we know you have a whole week to make tashlumin? It says Chag Shavuos. Memela says Ar Sameach. You count days to sanctify Shavuos as a Yom Tif. You count weeks to sanctify Shavuos as an entire week to bring karbanos. Memela, since Bizman Hazeh, Yom Tif is L'Doiros, so the counting of days is L'Doiros, and it's not linked to karbanos. But the fact that Shavuos is a Yom Tif of weeks for karbanos, that's linked to the Karban Omer. In other words, from the Karban Omer, we count weeks in order to sanctify Shavuos as a Yom Tif of weeks. But Lagabe, the Yom Tif aspect of Shavuos, we count days to sanctify Shavuos as a day. So in other words, the counting of the days is in order to sanctify Yom Tif. Yom Tif is not connected to the karbanos. So therefore the sanctification of Yom Tif is l'doiros, the counting of Yomim is l'doiros. The counting of weeks is to be makriv karbanos. Therefore it's linked to the Karban Omer. So therefore it's not l'doiros. That's the logic, that counting days would be d'oraisa, not linked to karbanos, and counting weeks would be linked to karbanos. Okay? Next step. You ready for this? This is the Iker. May, you ready for this? Okay. I'm going to tell you the Psak of the Beis Halevi. The Beis Halevi in Siman Lamed Tes has an amazing Psak. What's the halach if somebody forgot to count Friday night? What's the halach if somebody forgot to count Friday night? I don't hear. What? You have to stop counting with the bracha. Why? The mitzvah is what? It's one mitzvah. If you blow one, then you lose it. Is it pashut it's one mitzvah? There's such a shita. Who holds that it's all one mitzvah? The Bahag. The Bahag is of the opinion that if you miss one day, you blow the whole thing. Now we don't necessarily paskin like that. Actually we don't paskin like that. But we're choishesh for it. That's why if you're mesupik whether you counted a day, we say svek sveka. Maybe what? It's 49. We say so. Maybe you counted, and even if you didn't count, maybe it's 49 separate mitzvahs. Yeah. So we say svek sveka. That's the shita of we're choishesh for the bahag. So if you miss a day, you no longer count because of safek brachos lechumra. Safek brachos lekula. Thank you. Safek brachos lekula. What's the halacha? Says the Beis Halevi, if somebody missed day 9, he wants to say that on day 14 you could count with a bracha, and day 21 you could count with a bracha, and day 28 you could count with a bracha, and day 35 you could count with a bracha. He said, there are two mitzvahs. There are two separate mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah to count the days, and a mitzvah to count the weeks. So just because I blew the days, I didn't necessarily blow the weeks. So since I didn't have tamimim in the days, but I did have tamimim in the weeks, so therefore says the Beis Halevi paskins that if you miss a day, you could, every time the week is complete, that day you could count with a bracha. He says, actually, I found in Rabbeinu Yerucham, who asked, why don't we make two separate brachas? And he says it's because the days are d'oraisa, the weeks bizman hazeh are d'rabanan, and there's no separate bracha on the d'rabanan. So therefore, he says, according to Rabbeinu Yerucham, I understand why my psak is not correct, that you would not be allowed to make a bracha on day 7, 14, 21, and 28. Why? Because there's no bracha niskan on the drabanan of the weeks. However, says the Beis Halevi, but most paiskim hold sphere bizman hazeh drabanan. Most paiskim hold sphere, both the days and the weeks are drabanan. And yet, we still make a bracha. So we see you can make a bracha on a drabanan. So then why can't you make the bracha on the weeks? And what about according to the Rambam and the Rif? That's Sfira Bizman Hazeh Doiraisa. So then the weeks are Doiraisa Bizman Hazeh. So you can make a bracha on the weeks. So you say, well, wait a second. But maybe it's all one mitzvah. Rabbeinu Yerucham holds it's two mitzvahs. But if you're going to say it's one mitzvah, like all the Monei HaMitzvahs count Sfira as one mitzvah, not like two mitzvahs. But everybody knows, what's the halacha if on today a person said, Hayoim Asara Yomim La'omer, without the weeks. or if somebody counted the weeks. Hayoim Shavua Echad U'Shloisha Yamim. You're Yotzei. So since if you do one without the other, you're Yotzei, why can't, if I miss one, why can't I still do the other? Therefore the Beis Halevi paskins halacha l'maisa that if you miss a day, on day 7, 14, 21, 28, you could still count with the bracha. That's the psak of the Beis Halevi. Even though according to Rabbeinu Yerucham you can't make a bracha just on the weeks, according to those who say Sefiras d'Rabbanan, you should be able to, and according to those who say Sefira is d'Oraisa, you should be able to. So here's what I was struggling with last night. I don't think we paskin like the Beis Halevi. Whoever did such a thing. There are many people who forget. There are many people who forget. Not in this shul, but in other, not even in this city, but in other cities, there are people who forget. Did you ever hear that they count day 7, 14, 21 with the bracha? I missed the days, but I could still count with the bracha for the weeks. But the argument of the Beis Halevi is, since if I count just days without weeks, or just weeks without days, I'm yotzei, that means I'm yotzei one without the other. So why, if I blow one, can I not still count the other?
Does it make a difference in the format of the bracha?
The bracha is al Sefiras HaOmer. It's not even specific days or weeks. This is the psak of the Beis Halevi. So what I was...
The Beis Halevi, if somebody misses 1 week, let's say he misses day 7 or day 14, can you still count the bracha with the other days, or since it's one?
If somebody missed the weeks, let's say on day 7,
missed day 7.
He missed day 7. What he said, Hayoim Shiva Yamim.
He didn't say, he forgot it completely.
Let's say he said, but then he missed.
If you miss one day, you can't count it with a bracha anymore.
Right.
If you missed one of the weeks,
because then you miss. Well, then you miss both.
Right.
But could he do 14 on day 14?
No, it's the same thing.
No, there it's worse. Because there, not only did you miss weeks, you missed days also.
Right.
So, but his point is, okay, I understand you lost tamimos of days, but I didn't lose tamimos of weeks. That's a very big shaila. Katan shenas gadol is a.
I'm saying in terms of the weeks. Let's say, so bar mitzvah
who missed days
on day 6, bar mitzvah on day 7 he could.
So according to the Beis Halevi, yeah, he could count 7 for sure. For sure he could. He for sure could. That's a good example. That's a very good example of where this could apply. Yeah, that's a good point. So that's the question. I don't think we paskin like the Beis Halevi. I'm pretty sure we don't. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't bring down that if you miss days, you could still count the weeks with a bracha. So I was thinking, I think this is very important. If you miss a day, the Beis Halevi wants you to be able to count weeks with a bracha. But let's think for a moment. It's one mitzvah. And therefore the bracha was masakein on what? Counting. But the Beis Halevi seems to say, well, as long as I count either days or weeks, I'm still yotzei. So then if I miss one, I should be able to make a bracha on the other. So I want to share with you something I saw last night. An interesting possibility. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Tmidim Musafim, Parak Zayin Halach Yates, Lisbar kol ish ve'ish shiva shavuos miyoim hakravas HaOmer. You hear what the Rambam says? It's a mitzvah to count 7 weeks. Huh? What about the days? The Rambam doesn't even say there's a mitzvah to count days. Why did he only say there's a mitzvah to count the weeks? By the way, in Halacha Chav Beis, the Rambam says, mitzvah sasei lispar sheva shabbosos timimos miyoim havas HaOmer shenemar sfard lechem rasa shabbos u'mitzvah limnos hayomim im hashavuos. Shenemar tisru chamishim yom. The Rambam doesn't say there's also a mitzvah to count the days, or there's one mitzvah to count days and weeks. He says again, the mitzvah is to count the weeks, and it's a mitzvah to count the days with the weeks.
It's only 2 separate mitzvahs.
What?
It's only 2 separate mitzvahs.
So if it's two separate mitzvahs, why didn't the Rambam say there's a mitzvah to count the weeks and there's a mitzvah to count the days? Why does he...
One is to count just the weeks, and one is to count the days and the weeks together. Still two separate mitzvahs. I mean, you count the week and then you say how many days it is also. Still two separate mitzvahs.
So, but why is the mitzvah of the days counting the days with the weeks? Why isn't it a separate mitzvah? Mitzvah to count the weeks, mitzvah to count the days. Why is the mitzvah of the days specifically like secondary to the weeks? So you're saying the two mitzvahs. By the way, the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs counts for some as one mitzvah. He doesn't count it as two mitzvahs. But you want to say two mitzvahs. One is to count the weeks and one is to count the days with the weeks. Why does the Rambam first only talk about the weeks and then when he talks about the days with the weeks?
The Torah mentions the mitzvah of the weeks first.
Why the first time does he only say the weeks and then... So the Sefer Mo'irei HaMoyadim says the Rambam holds the Iker mitzvah as the weeks and counting the days is not a mitzvah b'fnei atzmai. It's not a chilek of the mitzvah. It's just a din, like a brisker approach. It's a din that in the mitzvah of counting the weeks, you should count the days with it. And if you don't count the days, there's a lacking in the counting of the weeks. Can I say it different? I want to say it differently. I think there's maybe a more reasonable way to say it. There's a mitzvah to count the weeks. Okay? Now, when you're counting weeks, there's units of 7, and weeks are also made up. Weeks are made up of days. A day is a seventh of a week. 2 days is 2/7 of a week. 3 days is 3/7 of a week. The mitzvah of Sefira is count the weeks. That's it. There's only one mitzvah. Count the weeks. But you can't just say, today is the 13th day. That's 1 week. No, it's 1 week and 6 days. No, why are you counting days? I'm not. I'm counting weeks. But I have to say what percentage of another week we're dealing with. It's not a din. Not like he's saying. It's not a din. The mitzvah is to count the weeks. So today is the 10th day. No, I only count weeks. I am. The 10th day means 7 days and 3/7 and 3 segments of a week. Memela, if I miss a day, could I count? Let's say I missed today. Can I count day 14? Say, well, I only blew the days, I didn't blow the weeks. No, I blew the weeks. I blew the weeks. If you miss a day, you're lacking in the counting of the weeks. You hear what I'm saying? You want to say it over?
Every single time you have amount of days you need perfectly.
What?
Sometimes you're going to have 13 days. It's not going to be...
No, but what's in a kuda? In other words, is there a mitzvah to count days?
No.
There's only mitzvah to count weeks. So why am I adding the days?
Let's say you're counting 13 days, so it's not 2 weeks. So you're saying the amount of the weeks. You're saying that a week and a percentage of the week.
Right, the counting of the days is a measurer of the week. Yeah? It makes sense? You want to say it?
Yeah, it sounds good. Sounds good. Beis Halevi wouldn't apply now.
What?
Beis Halevi seems like it wouldn't apply now. Because you can't count 7. Because if days are weeks, and you miss the weeks.
According to this, right, the Beis Halevi's Psak would not be correct, right? Now I'm trying to explain why we don't hold like the Beis Halevi. Trying to say, see, I'm borrowing it from him. He says the Iker mitzvah is the weeks, and the mitzvah count the days. He says, Ein hakavana to have a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. It's not a chelek of the mitzvah, but it's a din. You should count the days with it. I'm not sure I understand what that means. I think what we're saying is very logical. That days is week. There's not only one way to count weeks. 1 week, 2 week, 3 week. Is there only one way to count feet? Count feet. How many feet are the shul? This room is, I don't know, I'm guessing. 40 feet and 7 inches. No, just count feet. I need to tell you. Since we know that there are 12 inches in a foot, therefore, that's also a way to count the weeks.
Count once a week, not to the
No, every day I have to count the weeks. Part of counting the weeks is counting how many increments toward a week we're up to.
The word week is, the word itself is telling you that it's a unit that's comprised of 7 pratim. So by definition, by using the term week, it implies the days. Otherwise, you don't have the word. I'm saying not in English. I'm saying in Lashon Kodesh.
Okay, that's
or even Shabbos.
That's a very chashuv nekuda. I want to repeat what Rav Matisyahu is saying. That Rav Matis is saying that by very definition, the word week is a unit of 7 segments. So therefore, by definition of the Torah is saying count weeks, and the measuring unit is units of 7 segments. So even before I get to 7, 14, 21, part of that definition, the Tisbaru Chamishim. Now, had the Torah not said Tisbaru Chamishim Yoim, then maybe you would have said, just do 7, 14, 21. But the Tisbaru Chamishim Yoim, it's not adding a new mitzvah. It's saying in the counting of the weeks, you need to say how many increments that you counted.
And if it's very eloquent to the Rambam, why would say HaOmer at the end? So that's the ikr, by saying Shavua Chad U'Shloshim and HaOmer.
I mean, whether both are the Oraisa or both are the Rabbanon, yeah, right. I mean, we're not counting anything in deference to Rabbeinu Yerucham. Rabbeinu Yerucham holds there are 2 separate mitzvahs. Yeah, this is very good, very solid, very solid. I had something very hazy last night, but I think shkoyach matis. I think we what?
Why would the increments be the weeks? The week is just 7 days. So
why would the ikr mitzvah?
Be the weeks.
I mean, that's what Torah says, right? What's the lashon? The Torah, the lashon of the Torah is. Mehachel chermesh bakama tachel lispar shiva shavuos usvartem lochem mimachras hashabbos. It's Chag HaShavuos. It's a Yom Tif of weeks. Okay, shkoyach everyone. Have a wonderful day.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.